Welcome to Off Hours, a conversation between John Edwards and Chris Manning.
Welcome home, Chris. How you feeling?
Well, the flight home was a little bit rough. It was okay, but I managed to get a nasty cold on the flight home, so I've spent the last couple of days recovering from that trip, and it's not fun trying to deal with jet lag and a cold at the same time, and trying to prepare for my next trip, which, let's see, it's late Tuesday night, and I'm getting up at some ridiculous hour tomorrow morning to go to the airport to get to Albuquerque, so it's been a quick turnaround at home, and it was a bit of a challenging recovery.
So for anyone who may not have caught the episodes leading up to this one, do you mind sharing where you went and what you were doing there?
Last week, Rich, Loen, and I were in the UK for a few different reasons. The primary purpose of the trip was to go to Maker Central, which was a large maker fair located in Birmingham, England. So Rich and I brought over Rich's some of Rich's equipment, and we were wowing the folks over there with these this little CNC machine that Rich had designed. We spent a few days there, and then we headed over to London afterwards. We needed to get back there to fly out, and I thought it would be a good idea to show Rich some of the sights of London, since his past trips that he's been to London have been pretty brief and have been with family, so they've been a little bit different in terms of their focus than what we would do. So yeah, it was a whirlwind tour of Birmingham and London over a couple of days.
So what was your impression of Maker Central compared to other maker fairs you've been to?
It was a bit different than what we're used to. The size of it was nice. It was first off, the National Exhibition Center in Birmingham is massive. I couldn't believe how large this place was. It is a dedicated exhibition space, and I think we were in hall number 12 of 20, and it was absolutely enormous. So that was interesting to see. Also, compared to our maker fairs over here, it was far more commercial than we're used to. There were fewer sort of makers showing off what they were doing specifically, like sort of just individuals who were showing off what they were doing just for the fun of it, versus commercial enterprises that were showing off some of what they were doing. There were wood turners, professional wood turners that were there, and there were some companies selling wood turning equipment and things like that. Triton, which is a large tool company in Europe, similar to like a DeWalt or a Milwaukee in North America, they were there and had a large booth set up. But it was a lot of fun. A huge number of people walked through the door. I think there were 4,000 people on Saturday that walked through the door, and I don't know what the numbers were for Sunday. It wasn't quite as busy. It was a bank holiday weekend in the UK that weekend, and the weather was absolutely stunning. So it wasn't surprising that we didn't have a lot of people walking through the door on Sunday.
Nice. And in true Canadian fashion, you guys were handing out custom hockey pucks to people. How was the reception to that from the Brits?
Yeah, so as a bit of a backstory, one of Rich's kids is heavily into hockey, and he did these custom hockey pucks for the team one year on his large CNC router, and the pucks went over well, so he decided to build a custom puck carving mill out of some spare parts. I don't know that anyone else has ever built a custom puck carving mill ever, but Rich has one. And so we brought it over. It was funny watching people's reactions because half the people had no idea what these hockey pucks were. The other half were like, these look like hockey pucks. And no, that's what they are. Far more people knew what they were than I was expecting. Everybody seemed to have a good time when they found out what was going on. And of course, we had a big Canadian flag hung over the booth. So people quickly made the connection as to what it was that was going on. And sort of word got around the hall of these two crazy Canadians that were there customizing hockey pucks. So we got an excellent reception, and everybody there was super welcoming, which was nice to see.
So did Rich tote over all the hockey pucks as well in his suitcases, or did you guys pick those up while you were there?
No, fortunately, we didn't have to tote those over. That would have been miserable on top of the 100 pounds of CNC equipment that we pulled over. Vectric is the software that Rich uses for his machine, and they happen to be located just outside of Birmingham. they were kind enough to purchase the pucks locally for us. So there's a company in Sheffield that was the source for all the pucks, and so we just showed up and had them there. But I don't know how many pounds of pucks there were. There was probably 40 or 50 pounds worth of pucks there. So it was nice that we didn't have to carry those over as well.
And then after the fair, you orchestrated a couple of visits and trips for the two of you. And one of the more impressive sounding ones was the Goldsmiths Hall in London. So how did you wrangle that?
One of the nice things about getting involved in the various communities that I'm involved in, jewelry making and watchmaking and things like that, is I've gotten to meet a bunch of amazing people over the years. Last year at the Santa Fe Symposium, one of my fellow speakers was Dr. Robert Organ. I believe he's the deputy warden of the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, or the Goldsmiths Company in London. And he gave this great talk on fakes and how the Goldsmiths Hall deals with or finds fakes and recognizes them. He suggested that the next time I was in London to give him a shout and let him know, and he'd make sure that we got a tour of the place. So unfortunately, Robert wasn't in town when we were going to be there. However, we were very fortunate, and Dave Mary was able to give us a walkthrough of the Goldsmiths Hall, the Goldsmiths Company. Dave is in charge of training the new assayers at the Goldsmiths Hall and has been there for over 40 years at this point. So he's incredibly knowledgeable about what's going on there and gave us a great tour of what happens at the company.
For anyone who might not be familiar, what is the role of an assayer?
Before I get into that, I should talk a little bit about what the company does and how long they've been around. So they've been around now for 690 years, give or take. I believe they're brought into existence in 1327. I think it was Edward III who formed them. And it began as a way of controlling the jewelry trade in London itself. So anybody who wanted to be a goldsmith and sell precious metals as finished goods inside of the city of London needed to be a member of the Goldsmiths Hall, and they needed to have approval to be able to sell from them, which is convenient. It's sort of a form of protectionism, but it's important when you don't have any, you don't really have any consumer laws or manufacturing laws protecting you. These guilds were important for controlling trade and controlling the quality of goods that were being made in the city at the time. And on top of that, they also checked to make sure the quality of the metal was up to par. So if you said that you were selling something that was sterling silver, the warden of the company would arrange to make sure that all of your pieces were checked and that they were in fact sterling silver. Or if it was 18 karat gold, 22 karat gold, they checked to make sure that that's what you were saying you were selling is actually what you were selling. And so they would go around to each of the makers, each of the goldsmiths on a regular basis, and they would check all of the pieces that these artists were actually producing. The science of checking the quality of metal is assaying, where you're checking to see that it is actually what the metal is that you're saying that it is.
In talking to you, one thing that surprised me, and it seems absolutely obvious now in hindsight that I know it, but I didn't know it until you had paid this visit to the Goldsmiths Hall, and that is where the term hallmarking originated from.
Mm-hmm.
And I was not aware that back in the day, the assayers would actually go around and visit the jewelers themselves, and that eventually obviously came a point where that was just no longer tenable, and then they had the jewelers begin to start coming to the hall. You want to give a little bit of the backstory there on where the term hallmarking came from?
Yeah, it's funny, these terms that we use, and we don't really think about the origins of them. We don't question it. We just say, oh, of course, that's what it's always been. And to be honest, for probably 600 plus years, that's what the term has been. So it's not surprising that we don't really think about it. But the term hallmarking comes from the act of needing to bring these precious metal items, these pieces of jewelry, the silver plate, whatever it happens to be, to the hall, to the goldsmith's hall, and then it is assayed and marked. So yeah, the whole idea of hallmarking something physical, it involves the physical process of bringing something to the hall to be marked, and that continues to this day in London, where you can, as a jeweler, you bring your work to the hall for them to assay it and then mark it with a hallmark. So yeah, it's an interesting history of what that comes from.
And I recall George Daniels was very proud of the first case that he had ever gotten hallmarked. And actually, I believe his first case was rejected, and the assayer recommended that he head back and just add a little bit of silver to the case, and then he'd be able to get it hallmarked. And that was a very proud moment in his career as a watchmaker.
It's an interesting process because as a jeweler in the UK, any precious metal item that you make that's over a certain weight, something like 7 grams for silver, and I think it's 1 gram for gold and platinum pieces, they need to be checked by an independent third party for its purity. And this is something that's in law. In fact, it predates this idea of needing to check all these pieces, predates the English Constitution. So it's something that's carried on and initially was only enforced in London and then eventually enforced across the entire kingdom. I can understand why people would be proud of being able to hallmark their items and have them checked for that purity and be able to say, this is my stamp, this is my maker's mark on here, and this proves, this hallmark proves that it is in fact the quality of metal that I say that it is.
And the first time I'd ever heard of hallmarking, it seemed like a very strange and foreign concept to me, because this isn't something that we do here in North America.
It is an odd concept for North Americans because there's no requirement for an independent third party to test our precious metal. I can sell a piece over here and I can stamp it myself. I can stamp it with 18 karat gold or 925 for sterling silver, but I'm the one who's stamping it. And there's nobody checking to see if what I'm stamping it is in fact accurate. So we do have situations here in North America where people are selling goods that just don't meet that standard. But in England, if you want to be able to sell these precious metal goods, you must stamp them, or you must have them hallmarked, and you must have them independently assayed. So it is a bit of an odd concept for us, and that idea that we, that somebody will actually check it and will stamp it and verify it's actually what you say it is.
And there's certainly value in doing things the way that they do there in London. There's an interesting story hit the headlines, I believe it was just last year, here in Canada. A jeweler in the capital purchased some gold, presumably from the mint, through a bank. And it comes in a blister pack, so it's fully sealed. And when this jeweler went to use the gold in this blister pack, which is supposed to be essentially 99.9% pure gold, he went to roll it and it did not behave at all like gold. So then he tested it, and sure enough, it was not pure gold. So he brought it back to the bank, and the RCMP got involved, and there's an ongoing investigation as to precisely what transpired. But there is absolutely value in having a third party or a governing body deem that the metal that you're buying is indeed what it says it is.
I hadn't heard that story, but that's depressing, thinking that there is something going on at the mint, and obviously there's somebody, that's some sort of an internal problem, either somebody intentionally trying to steal metal or some part of their process that isn't working properly. Interestingly, in the UK, the Royal Mint is actually not above needing to have their items tested. Unlike a jeweler like myself, they don't need every single piece tested. However, there is another medieval ceremony that they use called the Trial of the Pyx that tests a certain percentage of all of the precious metal coins that the Royal Mint strikes every year. I think last year, I want to say they tested somewhere around 25,000 coins. And I think the process is that they take one random coin from each production run of any coin that they strike. Traditionally, it would go into a small box called a pix and would be delivered to London and tested once a year. So in period, the king would give a charter to a mint located in another part of the country. Let's say it would be a mint in Birmingham or Sheffield, and he would specify that the coins would need to have a certain mass, a certain size and shape. They would have to have a certain quality of stamping on them, and also a certain quality of metal. And so they would take some percentage of these coins at random, maybe 1 out of every 10 or 1 out of every 20 coins, and then they would send them all back to London, and eventually it was the goldsmiths company that was responsible for testing them. And once a year they would go through and they would test all of these coins and make sure that the mints were not actually scamming the king and making coins that were subpar. So you have to think that depending on how big of a problem this is at the Royal Canadian Mint, that's something that might have been caught through this process, even though today it's mostly a ceremonial process in the UK. But it might have actually caught something like this, at the Royal Canadian Mint.
There was another ordeal with the Royal Canadian Mint in recent years where a gentleman was actually caught smuggling gold.
Yeah, they were blank, the coin blanks, the gold coin blanks that they use for stamping the coins out of. Yeah, he was smuggling them out and was selling them at a local, I guess, the pawn shop or something like that. Yeah, he got away with, or he had gotten away with bringing out quite a few coins by the time he was caught.
Mm-hmm. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth.
Yeah, so it is obviously anytime you're working with precious metals like that in quantity, there's always the temptation for people to steal it. So you do have to be careful. And if somebody's, if this is a situation where somebody's making the coins less pure, or these blister packs less pure, then that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Especially because most people are not going to open those blister packs anytime soon. A lot of people are buying those as investments. Mm-hmm. And if it hadn't been a jeweler who was using it as a form of metal for their work, that could have gone unnoticed for years.
Yeah, who knows how many of these are sitting around in safes all around the country, or around the world for that matter.
So one of the fun side effects of the trial of the picks was that during the tour, Dave brought us into a vault and reached into a bag and handed me this massive gold coin. So for I think it was the Queen and Prince Philip's wedding anniversary. There was some notable wedding anniversary last year. And so the Royal Mint struck this 1 kilogram gold coin to honor this event. And so they had some of these gold coins there that had been part of the trial of the picks. They had been drilled out, they'd had sort of samples cored out of them, but they were still almost entirely whole. So yeah, Dave let us check these out, and it's an impressive thing having a 1 kilogram gold coin in your hands. It's maybe 12 centimeters across and probably 2.5 centimeters thick, and then it's a solid piece of metal. I think when Rich and I were on the subway afterwards, I think we figured it out, and it was somewhere around $60,000 Canadian for just the raw metal involved in that coin. It was absolutely massive. It was an impressive thing to see.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah, and he also had the silver version as well, which was a 1 kilogram silver coin. Obviously worth considerably less, and because of the density difference in between silver and gold, it's almost twice the thickness of the gold one, but absolutely massive coins. Like they were truly impressive seeing these coins in person and holding them.
Another troublesome bit of Canadian history, mint-wise, is Canada hit the Guinness Book of World Records for making a $1 million gold coin, which is I think it was 100 kilograms of solid gold, and that I have no idea how these guys pulled it off, but that was actually stolen from a museum in Berlin just last year, which is
Oh, really?
mind-boggling. To like, it was impressive for you holding a 1 kilogram coin. Now just imagine multiplying that by 100. I have no idea how these guys, number one, got into a museum and were able to lift this thing, and then number two, get it out of there. As far as I know, it hasn't reappeared, but it's not something I've looked into.
I have to say, 100 kilograms, it doesn't matter what it is. 100 kilograms is not something that's insignificant. Like that would be difficult to carry, and for something, even with gold, it would be a sizable object, but not massive. So it would be awkward for one person to carry just because of its mass. But I think it wouldn't be big enough that it would be easy for two people to carry. So I can't even imagine how you would get out of the museum with this thing. Like that's a awkward thing to have to get away with.
And while the face value reads $1 million, which maybe that was the case back in 2007, I believe the actual value today is somewhere on the order of about 4 or 5 million US for that volume of gold. Yeah, these guys definitely got away with quite the heist if they're able to just melt that down and sell it as little ingots.
Yeah, one of the nice things about stealing something like that, though, is that it's entirely untraceable. You can melt that down and turn it into whatever you want, and it's entirely impossible to trace. So that is the one advantage of precious metals, is that they can be infinitely recycled and they can be reused, and they could easily melt that down into smaller amounts and sell it off in small quantities over time. So it's an ideal crime if you can get away with it.
Theoretically. Now there are some rare alloys, we'll say. For instance, Rolex's Everose gold, which has a very distinct alloying that I don't know of another company anywhere in the world who has the exact same alloy. And there was someone who was caught lifting gold from Rolex, and I believe it was traced through the actual alloys that were coming out of it. I mean, you could mix it with other metals, but this fellow wasn't quite savvy enough.
Yeah, this is going to be at least 3 nines pure, if not 4 nines pure. I know one of the things that the Canadian Mint is actually well known for is the high purity that they're able to get through their refining process. So one of the downsides of that is that everything is coming out of there that isn't gold. So I expect that that this bar is probably as close to pure gold as you're going to be able to get in any quantity. And so unfortunately, you're not going to have the advantage of some unique alloying compound in there.
So it sounds like you got to handle some interesting specimens of coins while you were there. Did you get any sort of hands-on time or behind the scenes look at the sort of tooling that they're using to assay the metals that are coming through the Goldsmiths Hall?
Yeah, we were able to see the actual facilities where they're assaying pieces and where they're hallmarking them. And it's interesting to see how that process has evolved over the centuries. And in fact, it's interesting that the process hasn't evolved dramatically up until recently. So traditionally, the way that metals were tested, you'd have a sort of a keychain with known purity metals on them. So, it'd be a little key with a stick of 18 karat gold on it, or a little key with a piece of sterling silver, and another one with Britannia silver on it, pure silver. So you would have these, sort of this little keychain with all of your known good items on it, your known good metals on it. And you would bring that along with your touchstone, which is a particular type of stone. I don't remember the details of what type of stone it is, but it was a particular type of stone. And you would rub your known good sample on this touchstone. And then you would rub the piece that you were testing against that touchstone as well. You would then take a little bit of nitric acid, and the nitric acid will dissolve all of the other alloying metals other than the gold or the silver. And you can then compare the color of the known good sample versus the one that you've just tested, or the item that you're testing. And it would allow you to check and see what the purity level was. Now, of course, this is, it's a bit subjective, so it's not going to be, it's not going to be as accurate as some of the more modern methods. But it was still good enough that you could tell whether something was silver, or whether something was actually gold, or whether people were trying to scam you. So, for instance, German silver or nickel silver was an attempt to scam people into believing that what they were buying was silver instead of brass, right? Because nickel silver is basically a brass, and so this would be a way that you could test to see if that piece that you were being sold was actually silver or nickel silver. The next sort of step up in technology to test is a fire assaying method. We'll put a link in the show notes to the details about it and how it's actually done. But essentially, you're taking small quantities of something, and of a sample that you're trying to test, and you would use various methods of melting that sample, and then testing the weight of it, and versus what it started as. You could remove the other alloys that were in there. I believe they use a lead alloy. So you would mix let's say the gold with this lead alloy in the fire, and the lead will absorb all of the other alloying metals. Then you'll take the sample and you'll put it in a cupola, which is a particular type of crucible made out of a particular material. You put it in the kiln, and the lead will oxidize and be absorbed by the cupola. And in the process of being absorbed by the cupola, it will also absorb all of the other alloying metals along with the lead oxide. What you're left with then is pure gold. And you can take that sample of pure gold, test it against the original weight of the metal that you were given, and you can find out how much of that original piece was pure gold and how much of it was other things. So you could then say, okay, this was 75% gold, and that's what they told me it was. It was, it's 18 karat. But if they say that this is 18 karat gold, and really what you end up with is 50% gold at the end of it, well, then you know that they're trying to scam you and that isn't right. So fire assaying is a very old method of doing this, and it does require some material and some equipment to do it well. But it is a very effective way of being able to test the purity of metal. Eventually, there are different chemical ways of doing it that have come up. And then the most modern way of doing it, this is something that I think has only become accurate enough in the last 5 to 10 years, is an XRF technology. So it's actually using X-rays to test the purity of the metal. And it's not very fast, unfortunately. It can take several minutes to actually test the purity of it. But it's non-destructive, which is a nice thing. And it will break down exactly what materials are in that, in that particular piece, which is kind of nice. It will tell you a lot about the piece above and beyond just, oh, this is platinum or this is gold.
I've had a chance to use, I don't know if it's the exact same device they would have been using, but a mass spectrometer that used X-ray fluorescence, which is what XRF stands for, to determine the composition of an alloy. And I actually used it to reverse engineer an alloy that I wanted to use to make a ring for my wife. And I was able to get a friend to alloy that for me, and it turned out really well. But it's a really fascinating technology. Basically, you're looking at the secondary emission of X-rays from a material that have been bombarded with X-rays. So you're looking at what's bouncing back off of the material, and I believe it's the ionization. I'm way out over my head here, but basically breaking all that down, and every single element on the periodic table is going to give off a different signature, and based on the ratio or the volume of those signatures, you can take a 100% and break that down into the composite parts. So you say maybe it's 75% gold, maybe it's 4% platinum, and the rest is made up of nickel or silver or something like that. And you can get down to really trace elements. So you may find that you've got like a fraction of a percent is a rarer element like niobium or tantalum or something like that. And it's really, really interesting technology. I don't recall exactly how long the measurements took when we did it, but to me, it actually seemed remarkably fast. I was really impressed with just how quickly the tech worked. Certainly faster than using the touchstones, which I've also used in the past to settle a debate over the composition of the plating that is on vintage Omega calibers. There's a misconception among numerous people over the years that old Omega calibers were actually plated in pink gold, because it's not uncommon to plate a watch caliber in gold, and these older Omega calibers have a rose gold color to them. But that it turned out after this testing there was no gold whatsoever, and it's just more of a beryllium type mix that it has been plated with.
Yeah, I think the advantage of the XRF, obviously, the biggest advantage from their point of view is the fact that it's a non-destructive test. And when I say that it's not very fast, I think that they were talking about 30 to 60 seconds to test these pieces, which sounds quick, but the problem that you run into is somewhere like the Goldsmiths company in London, they're dealing with upwards of 5,000 pieces a day that they're testing. So when you're spending 30 to 60 seconds per piece testing, that's a significant amount of time when you have to get through 5,000 pieces in a day. So
yeah, you don't have 5,000 minutes in a day. Yeah.
Now, granted, they also don't have a single XRF either. They had several of them there that they were using, but it's still a remarkable amount of work.
And the other great upside from it too is you get the breakdown of what's actually in it, so you can replicate an alloy or determine that it is precisely what it says it is. Or you can see if there's trace elements in there that should not be in there. So maybe you've got an issue in your process of actually founding the alloys that you're making. And whereas with the touchstone method or the crucible method, you're basically eliminating anything that isn't the precious metal that you're after. So you actually don't know what those other elements were that were also in the composition.
Yeah, those other methods are really testing to see what the purity of the metal is, which is important, but there's a secondary interest in finding out exactly what the other elements are. And that's something that really XRF brings to the forefront. And when Robert was giving his talk last year at the Santa Fe Symposium, one of the things they've done is they've taken their collection of silver. So one of the advantages when you happen to be the place that everybody has to go to get your pieces tested for purity, they get to see all of the newest pieces that are coming out from artists in your area. And the Goldsmiths company has actively purchased brand new work from artists over the last 700 years. So they have perfect provenance for these pieces. They know exactly who made it. They know exactly when it was made. They know all of these details about it. And now with this XRF technology, they've been able to go back and test to see exactly which trace elements are in each of these pieces. And they've cataloged them all. And it's meant that they now have a database over the last, from the last 700 years that shows exactly which trace elements were in silver, for instance, at various times in history. So as the refining processes have been improved, different elements have been taken out of silver, as time has gone on. And so I think Dave was saying that they're able to sort of reliably put a piece within a 50-year period over the last 700 years, just based on the trace elements that are located in the metal, which is pretty impressive. It's that's something they were unable to do before. They needed to use other methods like checking the hallmark on it, which there are ways of faking that. So this is a more reliable way of finding out, okay, this metal is actually from this time period, and not just relying on the hallmark that's on there.
Fascinating. I can imagine in both the right or the wrong hands, that could be very valuable information to have, that sort of database.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've been talking in broad strokes about hallmarks, but what actually distinguishes a hallmark?
This was something that I knew little bits and pieces of, but I wasn't familiar with all of the details of it. So Dave was great at explaining what was going on and what was involved. And I should say that the reason that Dave is really great at this is because he actually trains the apprentice assayers in the office. He started as an apprentice himself and has come up and become a master assayer, and he now trains, I think he's had 6 apprentices there. So one of the things that's important that they do is that they are going to hallmark all of these pieces. And there are 5 different things that make up a hallmark on any piece. So if you take a look at a piece of precious metal from the UK, you'll see it may be very tiny. They may only be 0.3 millimeters in height, but there will be a hallmark on these pieces. Inside of it, there's a couple of things that you'll see. The first is the mark of the particular hall where it was assayed. So we've been talking about the Goldsmiths Company in London. They're one of 4 different assaying offices in the UK, and they're entirely independent of each other. So if you don't happen to like dealing with the London assaying office, you can go to Birmingham, you can go to Glasgow, and I think there's one in Sheffield. If there isn't any more, there used to be. Anyways, there are a number of them around, and as over time, some have come and gone. So the first thing that's on there is a mark to say which assaying office actually tested this metal and which one it came out of. The London assaying office has, their mark is a leopard's head. So that's if you take a look at any of the Goldsmiths Company's pieces, their artwork, even around the building itself, there are leopards everywhere, and that's part of the, that's their symbol for their hallmark. The next thing is a stamp to tell you which type of metal it actually is. So, for instance, if it's sterling, or if it's silver, not necessarily sterling, but if it's silver, then it has a lion. If it's gold, then it has a little gold. It has a little crown. If it's platinum, it has an orb, so a little orb with a cross at the top of it. You see in medieval ceremonies. There's a few others I can't remember off the top of my head, but those sort of the main ones that are there. So there'll be a stamp to tell you which type of metal it is. One of those stamps. The next thing is that there is a purity stamp. So it's a number that tells you what the percentage. Actually, it's not the percentage. It's the parts per thousand of the metal, the noble metal that you're marking. So, for instance, if it's sterling silver, then it's going to be 925, so 925 parts per thousand silver. If it was 18 karat gold, then it would be 750 parts per thousand of pure gold. So between the two, between the metal type and the purity, you can know what type of metal it is and how pure it is. The next thing is one of the more fascinating items on there, and it's a letter code to tell you which year it was stamped in. And they've been going through, I think he said they only use 20 different letters. There are a few of them that don't get used in the same year. So an I and a J, for instance, don't get used in the same year. They use one or the other, but not both. Just because it's impossible to distinguish, especially in some of these small marks, it's impossible to distinguish which one is which. But between whether it's a capital or a minuscule letter, and between whether it is what type of shape the box is surrounding the letter, you can tell based on that which year it was actually stamped. And these are going back hundreds of years. You can take a look in the various catalogs and see, based on that shape of the letter stamp as well as the letter itself, which year it was actually stamped in. And they're nearly through this series, so they're actually getting ready to start on another series with a different shape around the letter. And then last but not least is the maker's mark. So as a maker, you need to register with the hall and register your mark with the hall. And traditionally, it is a 3-character, like a 3-letter stamp that makes up your maker's mark. So in my case, it might be CMM for my initials. I might use SHS for my business, Silverhand Studios, but it would be registered to my name, and I would be the only person using that particular letter code in the area. And again, I think they distinguish based on the shape around the particular maker's mark. And those will get retired eventually, because obviously over time you can't just, you can't say, oh, CMM, you're never going to allow anybody else to ever use that combination of letters. So yeah, the 5 things make up a full hallmark, and all 5 of them must be present for it to be an actual hallmark on the piece.
So it's quite a bit of information to pack into the underside of a ring or something like that.
Yeah, it's funny because Tamara has a little ring that she picked up in England when we were there 20 odd years ago. And it's got she doesn't have large hands, and it has a fairly small shank on it. And, you pull out the jeweler's loop and you take a look at it, and it's got all of that information stamped in there. And you can see exactly, if I pulled out a book and with all the information for the letter code and everything like that, we'd be able to find out exactly when that ring was made. We've got the maker's mark in there. So even though it was a relatively generic ring, that she purchased in Hatton Garden, it's still something that we could trace back to the actual jeweler who made that ring, 20 odd years ago.
And given the records at the Guildhall, you could do that theoretically with just about any piece made in Great Britain over the last several centuries.
Absolutely. Yeah, you could, if you had a piece that was made 500 years ago in and around London and it was hallmarked, you could conceivably go back and find out exactly who it was that made it and when it was made.
So are they still using physical stamps for the most part, or have they moved on to something like laser engraving for doing much of the hallmarking?
The primary method of marking is still physical stamps. Now, those physical stamps are being made on laser engravers. So they've gone away from hand engraving these stamps now, and they're now making the stamps themselves using a laser engraver. So that I think Dave said it was like 60% of the work that they're doing is still physically stamped, with a stamp that they're making there. However, the shift is moving towards laser engraving, and you can go in and have your piece hallmarked on a laser instead of being physically stamped. And there certainly are advantages of that. Not from a speed point of view. It is slower for them to stamp using a laser than it is to use a physical stamp, especially because you can specify how deep you want that hallmark to be. If you want, you can just have it sort of a very thin surface treatment. I don't remember what the maximum depth was that they would do, but it was significant. And in fact, it looked, somebody looking at it at a glance wouldn't realize that it wasn't stamped with a physical stamp. Like it was really taking out material. It was at least a 0.5 millimeter deep. So it's certainly time consuming for them to cut them on the laser. And people are moving towards that just because you don't have to worry about, first off, you're not physically displacing metal. Anytime you use a physical stamp on a piece of metal, especially a piece of precious metal, it is going to displace it and potentially change the shape of the piece that you're working on. And depending on how delicate that is, that may be a concern for you. Something like one of my pens, I wouldn't be too concerned because it's a sizable piece of metal and it's not going to be, it's not going to be damaged by somebody using a physical stamp on it. But I can imagine people doing some delicate pieces of jewelry. You wouldn't want somebody physically stamping it. So the trend is moving towards laser engraving, and they've got a half a dozen really high end laser engravers there that were doing pieces, and yeah, they just throw each piece in and start engraving it, and it's remarkable what they were doing with some of these pieces.
And given the volume that I would imagine they're going through, they could score a tidy profit just capturing the particles of the precious metals that they're vaporizing with the laser over the course of a year.
Yeah, they're obviously taking the fumes, the vapor out into, away from the work area, because you don't want that in the work area with your employees. So maybe they're throwing those into a very fine, or putting perhaps they're putting that air through a very fine filter and they're able to capture that afterwards. I don't know. That would be something I didn't think to ask that when I was there. Perhaps on my next visit.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine they must have something in place because that sort of level, people tend to be very strict about collecting every last bit of gold dust or platinum dust.
The visit that we had to the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths was just absolutely fascinating. It was nice to see this gorgeous building and the processes, as well as learning a little bit more about the medieval origins of it and the history. So that was great. It was a bit amusing when we were leaving because, as it turned out, there was a royal visit at the company while the day we were there. Princess Anne had some business with the company. One of the things most people don't realize is that there are a number of these companies in London. I want to say there's 40 of them or more, and most of them have turned into primarily charitable trusts. And so most of the work that they do today is actually as a charitable trust. The Goldsmiths Company is one of the few that still actively trains people in the same medieval arts that it was originally founded to train, and still fulfills its original purpose, which is assaying precious metal items in the UK. I believe that Princess Anne was there on some sort of charitable business, running part of one of the charities that the company deals with. It turned out as we were about to leave, she was about to arrive, so we had to be shuffled out the side door, sort of kick the riffraff out the side door as the royalty arrived. So that was sort of an amusing way to finish off our visit to this medieval institution. Was then being sort of kicked out the side door by another medieval institution.
Kicked out by royalty.
That's right.
Did you get up to anything else interesting while you were in London?
We covered so many things that we're not going to be able to talk about all of it in this episode, but I was able to add in some watch specific things into the trip as well, which was kind of nice. Since the last time I was there, the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers has given their extremely impressive collection of clocks and watches to the Science Museum in London. And they're now out on display at the Science Museum. And this collection is great. It's a really broad collection covering, I think their earliest piece is a 15th century chamber clock, all the way up to a few of the modern makers like George Daniels and Roger Smith. There are pieces from both of them in here as well. So you have a few living watchmakers that are being presented or being represented there, but all the way back to 15th century pieces and everything in between. So it's nice to be able to actually see this collection and check it out. It's presented chronologically, which makes it interesting because you get to see, we talk about some of these different differences and progressions in escapements and things like that, but it's very different to actually see in person when the pendulum comes in and starts becoming something that people are putting in clocks, and all of a sudden the clocks all change from virgin foliate to pendulum clocks, and it's nice to physically see that change as they go along. It's also nice to be able to see just how early on watches are something that we would look at and you would recognize as, oh, this is a pocket watch. This is something that I could actually see in my pocket and carrying with me and using to tell the time. And that happens very early on in the progression of watchmaking. So it's a beautiful collection. It was really nice to be able to check out.
Yeah, when I saw their collection, it was still housed at the back of the guild hall. And it was busting at the seams back then. So I would imagine it now being at the Science Museum, that is particularly well laid out and more than likely better curated than it was back then. But it was still astoundingly impressive. Just the sheer volume and value that they had packed into this tiny space at the back of the guild hall when I saw it there. And there were a number of pieces and bits of horological history that certainly left their impression on me when I got to take that in. So it is a truly noteworthy collection. And I would strongly recommend anyone who's into watchmaking or horology at all to certainly make a point of checking out their exhibit at the Science Museum.
Absolutely. It's a fabulous exhibit. As you say, it's well laid out and curated now. I think the piece that I was surprised to see, and I was pleasantly surprised to see, is they have John Harrison's H5 on display there. So it's kind of nice to be able to see that in person and be able to check that out. Of course, it's in a closed case and it isn't running, so there's a limit to the value in terms of being able to see it. Obviously, you can't see the mechanism or anything, but it's still nice to be able to see. And I was also surprised at the number of clocks and watches they have that are still running, including some that are hundreds of years old, that are still functioning and keeping reasonable time as well. So it was nice to see some of these pieces still in use and still actually running right now while they're on display. So a great collection, worthwhile visiting. In fact, the entire Science Museum is worthwhile visiting if you've never been. It's a great exhibit. They have everything from early Industrial Revolution engines, like they have an original Newcomb engine and Watt engine there, all the way up to modern computers. They have a Cray supercomputer on display there.
You call that modern?
That is not necessarily modern,
resist,
but there
sorry.
are examples. It is an example of a more modern thing.
Yes.
Yeah, they've got stuff about space flight in there. They've got all sorts of amazing things on display. Some of the engines and models they have there are great. They've got a model of Babbage's difference engine number 2 on display that I believe is functional. I don't think they use it very often, but it is there and functional. So the fabulous displays. The exhibits are great, and they're certainly geared towards kids. So if you have children and you're looking for something to do in London, then I highly recommend the Science Museum. The one thing I will warn you, I wasn't prepared for this when we were there. The museums in London have very easy hours for the workers. They open late and they close early during the week. So I think the earliest they open is 10 a.m. and most of them were closed by 5:30. So it means that you really have to get into the museums during the day if you want to see them. They're not open late at night on weekdays. I think on Fridays they are, but they're not open late on weekdays. So unfortunately, we didn't get a chance to see a few of the things that we wanted to see, mostly due to the fact that the museums weren't open when we were going by. And one of the museums we did miss out on was the British Museum. We were going to nip into the British Museum quickly to take a look at their watch collection. And again, they have a fabulous watch and clock collection. And the reason we were going to visit there quickly was because Matt, the watch nerd, who we've mentioned a couple times on the show, he invited Rich and I for drinks after work. And he had suggested a place just across from the British Museum. Unfortunately, they were closing up before we were able to get there. But it was nice to be able to spend the evening. Matt and his friend Greg, we sat down, had drinks, and had dinner with them, and we had a great evening of chatting about watches and clocks and some of the things that we all do and some of their collections. And it was a really nice chance to visit and meet a couple of fellow watch nerds in person. So it was nice to appreciate the invitation, Matt, and thank you for having us along for dinner. It was a good evening.
And you and Rich were both officially inducted into the fold of watch nerds and clock nerds.
Absolutely, yeah. Now a member of Team Watch Nerd. So if you haven't seen the Team Watch Nerd hashtag on Twitter, then you can go check that out. We'll put a link to that in the show notes. But yes, I am now an official member of Team Watch Nerd.
Thanks for listening to Off Hours. You can find detailed show notes at offhours.show. If you'd like to keep up to date with the show, follow us on Twitter @OffHours. John can be found on Twitter @UnderTheLoop, and Chris can be found on Twitter and Instagram @silver_hand.
For security reasons, baggage left unattended will be removed and destroyed.
I'm sitting here in London Heathrow Terminal 2 in the departures gate, waiting to get back on a plane back to Toronto and eventually Ottawa, sitting with Rich Loen, who has been dragging me along on this adventure for the last couple of days. If you listen to the last podcast, I guess a few episodes ago, you'll know that I am here in the UK. We were at Maker Central primarily. That was the reason for the visit, and we also made a quick stop in London. And Rich and I are just going to chat a little bit about what we were doing here and what we thought. So I guess my first question to you is, what do you think about international travel, carrying a large CNC mill with you?
It's interesting that you can do it. That you can pack a CNC into 2 suitcases.
Yeah.
And then head off and just schlep these bloody heavy bags through security, I guess we checked it, but actually checking it, the Canadian security people did go through every single one of our bags, and I had everything wrapped in plastic and bubble wrap, and they went and opened up every single thing. So someone in security was quite curious about what we were carrying. And then schlepping it through the London tube is interesting. About half the stations don't have elevators, so we had to schlep them up and down the stairs, which...
yeah, that got a little bit entertaining, didn't it?
It is. It's ridiculous.
I'm sure my shoulder will recover by the end of the month. That was interesting. What did you think about travel inside of the UK? Because, of course, for us in Canada, famously, we have no rail system in Canada anymore. Mm-hmm. And or at least no usable rail system.
Is astonishing.
Yeah, it really is.
And it makes you see what it ought to be.
Yes.
And we just don't have anything like it in North America. Yeah. And certainly not in Ottawa.
We were fortunate when our destination was Birmingham, and it was at the large center there, the NEC, I think is what it's called.
Yeah, National Exhibition Center, which basically it looks like a spaceship has landed.
Yes.
On Earth, and it's a very futuristic building. You could film a science fiction movie there.
It's remarkable how large that building is as well. Yeah. I didn't realize when we were before we arrived the scale of that building.
And we start at one end of it, trying to find
where
the place is, and you're just carrying your bag on and on and on forever.
Yeah.
Past the vaping convention, past the supernatural convention, past this, that, and the other thing, until you finally get to the Maker Central place.
Yeah. What did you think of Maker Central? This was the first year for it, and we didn't really know what to expect. But what did you think of it?
I had at first thought it would be a maker fair. Like I've been to plenty of those in
right. We've been to a few maker
fairs
in Ottawa and other places,
and it wasn't like that at all. It's very, very. It was a commercial thing. Then they were using the brand power of the YouTubers. Yeah. So the fair is commercial. More commercial than normal than you'd see. So they had comped us a booth, actually, which was nice. I had emailed them and said, we're much more like a normal Maker Faire booth, where what we were doing was very akin to what I would say makers are doing. So they had that. They had at the show they had wood turners, and they had someone with a forge. But the rest of the booths were pretty much commercial, like just selling things and all that.
Yeah, and it was nice to see some of that as well. I think that's one thing that we could use a little bit more of at some of the maker fairs, because for a lot of people, they'll see, somebody like us setting up and showing off a tool that they're using. And it was nice to see some of those people at the show being able to say, hey, you can buy this, you can get supplies, you can get some material. So
in fact, you can go to that booth and buy a 3D printer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So some of that was nice. It would have been nice to see a few more makers there, although I suspect being the first year, maybe they'll have some more space for makers next year. I have to say the booth they gave us was absolutely ridiculous.
It was.
We'll post a photo of me standing in the booth before we set up, and it was probably 4 times larger than the largest booth I've ever had at an art show or any kind of a maker fair before. So that was a pleasant surprise.
Yeah. As we were setting up, he says, "Here's your booth," and he's like, "Do you have any banners or anything?" And it's like, "No, we don't have anything at all." So we tried to use our 4-inch by 4-inch stickers to create enough of a presence in the booth.
Yeah, we had the Canada flag that was hanging there as well.
I had brought a flag thinking I'll never put this up because this is just so incredibly obnoxious. But then you see the booth, it fit right in, and you know.
And it was nice because it helped people identify who we were and that we were there from a ways away.
And of course, we're carving hockey pucks, which was quite an exotic thing to do in England. And so people would look at the hockey pucks and you're carving pucks with this sort of, what the heck are you up to? And then you just point at the flag and they go, "Oh, okay, you're from Canada. Oh, okay, I get it."
That makes a little more sense now.
Yeah.
Not just some crazy person who's trying to confuse the locals. What was your highlight of Maker Central?
For me, it's the kids when we get to make pucks for kids, and I would call families over, and just frantically wave at them, and they'd look at me like, "Oh my God, there's a crazy man," and but then I'd say, "Here, we're going to make you a puck," and they, "Well, how much?" "Free." "Oh, okay. Well, we're using Vectric Aspire, which is far overkill for what we were doing, but to do the CAD portion of it, which is just sort of putting someone's name in and choosing what graphics you want on the puck, and then doing the CAM tool paths, and then sending it down to the machine, and letting the kids see that whole process, and then turn and see a machine going and see it moving on the screen as well as moving.
Yeah, that was nice for people to be able to see because Vectric did have a booth set up, but it was I didn't have much chance to go and see it because we were crazy busy the entire time. But it is nice to be able to see a machine sitting there and a computer there having us work on Vectric
and the whole tool chain.
Exactly.
Yeah, which they apparently their CNC. The spindle crapped out in the first hour of the show. So they were...
And that's always the danger. In fact, I was terrified of the fact that we were going to lug this 100-pound CNC mill over to the other side of the pond and end up being in a situation where we couldn't do anything because some critical piece of hardware failed.
I tried to bring spare parts for everything that I thought likely to blow or break. So I had spare bearings and... belt.
But at the end of the day,
motor
we didn't
drivers.
Need it. It was brilliant. It was assembled quickly, and everything worked fine. We had very few issues with it. Yeah,
it's an amazing thing that little CNC has made thousands of pucks.
Yeah,
it was just thrown together in a month in the basement with some spare parts.
So you think you'll go back to Maker Central again now that you've experienced actually lugging 100 pounds of mill around? Do you think you would do it again? Or would you do it differently?
I would consider making a lighter version of the machine.
Yeah.
But and I don't know that I'd come all the way from Canada just to go to the show. But if we're invited somehow, and it would be fun to come back. And a year from now, I will have recovered from.
Of course, that's right. I'm asking you this right now, and your knees and ankle and back are sore from carrying this thing around, and so that may not be the best time to make that decision. So after we spent 2 days there, because I guess we arrived early Friday morning in London, took the train to Birmingham, and then set up Friday night. Spent the Saturday, Sunday there.
Yeah, and it was interesting because we were in the hotel where all the ridiculously famous YouTubers were, and so that was fun to hang out with Jimmy DiResta, Laura Comp, and all the rest of them, and a nice bunch of people.
Yeah, it was. They were all very welcoming. It was nice to be able to chat with people. There were a lot of people from America there, which was nice. I think they had. They were happy to see some other people from their side of the world as well to chat with, and people who are more likely to go to some of the maker fairs that are closer to them.
And I know that Jimmy DiResta and a bunch of YouTubers went to Alex Steele.
Well, that's one of the nice things when you do visit some of these places. The opportunity to do shop visits arises. I'm often traveling to things like the OTI symposium, and one of the things we intentionally do is arrange shop visits with the people who are local, just to give an opportunity to see that sort of thing. So if you happen to be traveling somewhere and there's an opportunity to maybe visit a shop or see some sort of a setup of somebody making
and just to
worthwhile.
see the different things that are available in different areas.
Yeah.
Like it might be different types
Yeah,
of
different
wood
services,
or
yeah.
just different ways of doing things.
Sure.
You go, oh, I never thought of that, but that looks cool.
Yeah, exactly. So we spent Friday, Saturday, Sunday in Birmingham. Saturday morning we woke up and chatted with a few people and sort of had a late start, but that was good because we had a chance to sit and have breakfast with a few people and chat a little bit more. And then we had a bit of a long journey back to London. Unfortunately, I think you got us on the wrong train initially. You got us on the milk run back to London.
That is. I wanted to stop at every stop and enjoy the countryside. Get out at each station and just wave my hand at tiny towns all along the way. And then, of course, the train of its own accord decides to just park.
Yeah, unfortunately, there were signals there on the.
But luckily, we were in one of the nicest areas of the train, which was this little area right where the bathroom was. So we got to sit and watch every single passenger visit the bathroom and try to figure out how to make the door open and close, which is sort of frighteningly automated. You press a button and the door closes, and really, you don't know if it's going to open of its own accord.
That's right. Yeah.
Disconcerting.
So once we finally did arrive back in London midday on Monday, we had a chance to do a little bit of touring and go out and see things. Now you've been to London a few times before, but for quick visits. What did you? And this wasn't by any means a long visit, but what did you? What were your impressions of London?
Monday was nice because it was a bank holiday, so there was not really much crowds on the subway. It was pleasant to get around. On Tuesday, we were out at just after work, and the subways were absolutely packed. It was crazy, and all that. And it was pleasantly sunny and warm, actually hot.
Yeah, it was
like
29 degrees and
29
sunny
degrees,
every day we were here.
Which makes one think you should have brought shorts. And then I think we went to the Science Museum on Monday.
Right.
That's an amazing place. The James Watt steam engines there. One of the first ones was a water pump to pump water out of wells.
Right.
And,
well, we saw the Newcomb engine, which was designed originally for that was a predecessor to the Watt engine and was designed for pumping water out of a mine shaft, and that was unbelievably
was that the
massive.
Newcomb? I thought that
was
was
the first one we saw was the Newcomb engine. The second one was the Watt engine.
Okay.
And
Watt had better marketing.
Watt did have.
It's a Tesla Edison thing.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Better marketing. But they're absolutely fascinating, the scale of this, and it's nice to see that early Industrial Revolution equipment still sitting in use. And I guess if the zombie apocalypse ever happens, we may need to raid the VN or the Science Museum to kickstart the Industrial Revolution again.
We'll pull up a van and we'll load a Watt steam engine and a Cray 1.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's the nice thing about the Science Museum. If you've never been to London, or if you've never been to the Science Museum in London, it's worth a trip. There's some fascinating things in there. Everything from, as we say, the early Industrial Revolution, all the way up to modern machines. They even had a relatively modern CNC lathe on display there.
Mm-hmm.
They also had Cray supercomputer sitting there.
Charles Babbage difference engine number 2.
Yeah, that's right. They had the number 2 difference engine, which unfortunately wasn't built in his lifetime. But
no, that was interesting. He designed it, but they couldn't build it at.
That's right. In fact, the one that's on display in the Science Museum was built very recently. I want to say it was built turn of the century.
It was 85 to 2002, I believe.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It was finished at the turn of the century. So, yeah, it's nice to see some of those things that are there. And they've got some fun exhibits there. It's certainly a great place for kids. There's definitely a lot of really fun exhibits there for
and
kids
some
to play
interactive things. The sound area.
Yeah. Although I can't imagine sitting in that sound area all day as a guard. That would drive you mental.
But there's a nice exhibit in the middle of that called Do Not Touch.
Yes.
Which is just covered in Do Not Touch signs. You're supposed to touch it, but you get these absolutely horrible looks from people when you actually walk over and touch it, and they're like,
Yeah, it was great.
"Did you read the enormous letters all over this thing?" And they don't realize it's an ironic thing.
Yeah. Now, one of the big reasons I wanted to visit is the Worshipful Company of Clockmakers has set up an exhibit there with their collection of clocks and watches. It is, I believe, the oldest collection of clocks and watches in the world, and it is quite impressive. They have a huge selection, everything from an early 15th century chamber clock. They have a few larger clocks in the museum as well. I think they had a few early, I think it was a 14th century tower clock in the museum.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see, to sort of chronologically, if you will, follow through the clock museum and see the differences in how they make gears. They go from little pin-shaped things to properly shaped gears.
Right. The early 15th century clock, it doesn't have a properly shaped involute gear like what we use today with, that's properly efficient and will transmit power better.
I don't know what you call them. There's the little flag things that...
the Virgin Follet, escapement that's on those early clocks.
Yeah. And then to see the progression of the technology, and
then all of a sudden
time.
Pendulums come into being, and everything.
But it's all
switches over.
accessible.
Yes.
I mean, you can look at it and see how it works, and then you see a better way of doing it, and you go, yeah, okay, I get that.
Yeah.
Which is it's different in the way nowadays. It's like electronics and it's like you don't see inside and how something works and what their progression is. Like the chips have a much greater transistor density or something.
But that means
hard,
nothing to the average person. Yeah,
just
you
like,
can't look at it and say,
my new iPhone does more.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so it's really neat.
Yeah, it's nice seeing that progression. They have an incredible collection there. As you say, it is in chronological order, which is nice because you do get to see that progression through time as the watches start to get smaller and smaller, and it's remarkable how quickly that happens.
Yeah. There are watches from a long time ago that you'd be very happy to have in your pocket.
Absolutely.
No problem at all.
And this is you see the first sort of pocket, well, not really pocket watches, sort of travel watches that are appearing that sit on a desk and operate on a desk, and they're appearing in the 16th century. And by the time you get to the end of the 17th century, you have something that we would recognize today as a pocket watch. And it's
completely
remarkable.
usable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Maybe not as accurate, but it doesn't matter how accurate it is.
Yeah.
You get there when you get there in the end. But it was nice also to see the most recent watches.
And that is one of the nice things they've got.
Like very, very modern things and still innovation occurring. Whole new ways of building watches.
Sure, they have watches there from Derek Pratt. They have watches there from Roger Smith. They have some watches there from George Daniels, including the Patek Philippe. He modified with his coaxial escapement, and that's what he eventually was able to use to convince Omega to put it in their watches and license the patent from him. And then they have a few of his pocket watches there, which is nice. Now, if you go to the British Museum, they do have a few more of his watches there, including a couple of his other more famous ones. But it is nice to see a whole range of watches there and clocks. Of course, they're focusing on a lot of English watchmakers there, a lot of English clockmakers, but they are the Worshipful Company of Clocksmiths in London. So it makes sense that they're actually focusing on British horology as opposed to horology in Switzerland or anywhere else.
Yeah, it was a very, very nice exhibit and in a nice location and just lovely to walk through.
Yeah. Now, Tuesday morning we woke up and we had wanted to see a few things at the V&A quickly before we went off to our first appointment. But one of the things we found out while we were traveling here is that museums have very relaxed hours here, and they don't open until 10 a.m. in the morning, and they close at 5:30 in the evening, which is rather
Museums
annoying.
have bankers' hours.
They do have bankers' hours, and we were a little bit disappointed, so we didn't have an opportunity to run into the V&A first thing in the morning, but we did get a chance to go back there later in the afternoon before we were going out for drinks. So what did you think of the V&A? Because I think this was your first opportunity to go through the V&A, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's another nice museum, and it's interesting. We didn't have to pay anywhere. It's like you give a donation should you like to, but it didn't seem to be necessary. The V&A is, I would say, one of the interesting things about it is it's difficult to find what you're looking for. We were looking for At one point, I was looking for the modern gallery. You're going down passageways and upstairs, and you're basically lost.
That's the problem with these old Victorian buildings, right? They were never built with the intention of putting this many galleries in there.
Yeah. But on the other hand, you find a lot of things along the way.
Yeah.
I think almost every gallery has something interesting. I'm happy to stop and look at things and see what they're doing and how they're doing it.
And to be fair, we only spent an hour and a half there, which is probably 1,000th of the time that you actually need to be able to get a proper visit into the V&A, because it is just so dense with spectacular exhibits, spectacular objects. I really wanted to go back because the last few times I have been in London, I've been trying to get a good look at the Merode Cup, which is a 15th century silver chalice that I've been fascinated with for years. I've been studying for years and wanted to see in person. And the last few times I've been here, it has been off display, which was maddening. But finally, I was able to see it, so that was nice to be able to.
And the last time you were here on a Friday.
Yeah.
It was supposed to open, but then they just delayed it till the Monday, and you were flying out on Sunday. So
the one room in the exhibit they hadn't rebuilt yet was the one that I really wanted to see. Yeah,
you can go to a museum and if you pick almost any item in it, and if you really know the history of it, all of a sudden it becomes a magnitude more fascinating.
Absolutely.
And to look at this thing, which I would normally have just walked by and not even given a second glance to. And then you start looking at it and you realize the technology and what they're doing with that, and how innovative it was.
Yeah.
And then it becomes even more beautiful and more amazing.
Yeah, it is a remarkable piece, and certainly from a silversmith's perspective, technically it's a very challenging piece that they made. And that's one of the reasons that it's attracted me so much, is that it has incredibly skilled silversmithing and raising the cup itself. It also has some very remarkable enamel work in it. We'll make sure there's a photo of it in the show notes.
And anytime I look at something like that, in which the museum is just full of things with such fine artistry and fine work, and I think of going down to my shop and trying to create something like that, and I don't operate at those tolerances at all, even though I have much more modern equipment.
All right, but the nice thing is that those things are achievable, right? And of course, in some cases, they were made by many, many hands. So we were while in the same room as the Merode Cup, we were looking at this large, I guess it was a 16th century Flemish tapestry, and looking at that couldn't be made by one person. It's just too large an item to be made by one person.
It would be a life's work. For someone.
Absolutely. Yeah. If you wanted to do it as a single person, you'd spend your life doing it. But it is remarkable looking and seeing these pieces. We saw some micro mosaics in one gallery that were fabulous. John and I talked about some of the micro marquetry that Patek Philippe, I believe it was doing on some of their watches. Well, these were larger scale items.
One was a whole tableau of Rome.
Yeah.
And you stand a meter from it, it looks just like a painting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then you get closer, and it's just tens of thousands of incredibly tiny little pieces.
Yeah, it was some remarkable work. Now, when we got up to we did finally find the modern art, the more modern art gallery, and one of the galleries that we saw on the way in that was really interesting was the Rapid Response Art Gallery. Explain to us what exactly is a Rapid Response Art Gallery?
Yes, it appears to be. I'll be slightly facetious, but that they spot something that is art worthy and literally rush out to get it and get it in the gallery. And it doesn't have to be something amazingly beautiful. It can just be something that's evoking emotion. They had everything from T-shirts to the first 3D printed gun.
Yeah,
and like things like that are changing the world right now.
Yeah, it's nice. One of the things that I like about the V&A is that they continue to add to their collection with modern pieces, and they intentionally collect what is possibly the best art today in an attempt to be able to fill their galleries 200 years from now, right? So
not a 3D printed gun was intended to be art, but it's thought-provoking in the way that a lot of art is.
As a special treat on our last night, we were able to arrange drinks with Matt the Watch Nerd and a friend of his, Greg. We got together near the British Museum, and we spent the evening with Matt and Greg. It was a wonderful evening chatting with people who have similar passions to us and are curious about many of the same things that we are. So that was very pleasant, and we appreciate the opportunity to meet these guys.
At dinner, one of the interesting things I thought was the watch Matt was wearing, which
Yeah.
it had a hand going around once a second, but stopping every eighth of a second. But the thing is, just sitting chatting at dinner, and this watch would be sort of ticking away on his wrist, it would catch your attention because the motion was so unique, especially for a mechanical watch.
Right. So the regular seconds hand mounted at the center was a stop seconds, which is nice to see. I like that stop seconds. But then the subdial at 9 o'clock was an eighth of a second. The watch was oscillating at 8 hertz. So if you listen to last week's episode of the podcast, we talked a little about the different frequencies that watches are running at. So this one was running at 8 hertz, and you could see the subdial had a stop second, but for an eighth of a second. And it was nice to be able to see this move along. And
It's
I
just
grabbed
fast
some,
enough to be fascinating.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
not so fast that you don't, it's just not spinning around.
It was a nice watch to see. It was pleasant to see something a bit different. So, anyways, that was a quick rundown, quick chat with Rich, and what we were up to this week. It was a whirlwind tour of England and Birmingham and London, but it was certainly worthwhile, and it was enjoyable. I'm certainly looking forward to coming back, and I should be back later this summer for a BHI course, and looking forward to doing that. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time here, so it's not quite a whirlwind tour.
Yeah.
Because there's no way you can do the V&A in an hour and a half.
It is hard to see London in a day and a half.
Oh, absolutely. It's
yeah.
impossible to see London in a day and a half. But we got to see some interesting things. All right. Well, thank you very much, Rich, and appreciated the trip. And it was a good time traveling with you. And this has been a good chat. It's been nice to record our ideas and thoughts about the trip.